Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Katherine Daniels, and I'm the Farm and Forest Land Specialist for the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Today is Wednesday, July 1st, 2015, and I'm here in DLCD's offices in Salem with Mr. Hal Brauner, former DLCD director, who has graciously agreed to be interviewed as part of Portland State University's Oral History Project on Oregon's statewide land use planning program. Thank you. Why don't we begin by having you share a brief personal background about you and your family's arrival, settlement, and early life in Oregon.
Oh, going back that far. My family. Okay. My parents were early ones. My mom was born in Oregon in 1908 in Corvallis. My grandfather moved to Corvallis with his brothers and sisters in 1904. And my dad moved to Corvallis, Oregon again in 1921, and he brought his family out there. I was born and raised in Eugene, Oregon, and Dad was transferred up to Portland for a job, and I graduated from Roosevelt High School in Portland, went to Clark Community College in Washington, while living at home, got married, started working in sawmill, Justina Sawmill, and down in Eugene, decided that wasn't what I wanted to do in a career. I went back to school at the University of Oregon and graduated there, spent a brief time in San Francisco, and came back and started working for the state of Oregon. So then my history of the state of Oregon is what we'll be talking about probably.
Right. So you have served the state of Oregon over your career in a number of capacities in the public sector. What prompted you to pursue a career in public service?
That's an interesting story, probably. When I was working at the sawmill, there was a personnel director that was on the board of forestry. His name, I think, was Ted Hughes, if I recall. And I was majoring in political science, and he said, "Why are you majoring in political science?" I was working at the mill and going to school. He said, "Oh, because I want to probably run for the legislature or something. I want to really make a difference." And he says, "Well," he says, "you come from a poor family. You don't have a lot of money to run for office." And he says that unless you want to be beholden to a lot of people and take their money to run for office, you can influence a lot more. If that's what you really want, by becoming a staff person. And so that's what I did. That's what influenced me there. So,
Interesting.
it was good advice he gave me.
Interesting. Well, I understand that you were involved in around 1972 on the Willamette Valley Project Foresight. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll maybe give you a little bit of history leading up to that too,
Okay.
because I was involved long before that. When I started working in '63, I was in the budget division and started working for the state of Oregon. And my budget assignments was primarily the natural resource agencies and the transportation agencies, so I got interested in that. And in those days, the legislature, the governor's staff for budget carried 3 roles, like they do now. For about 6 months out of each biennial period, we put the governor's budget together and worked on that. And 6 months while the legislature was in session, there was no legislative fiscal office staff in those days, just one person. And so we staffed the Ways and Means Committee. So we put the budget together, staffed Ways and Means Committee. And then in the off season, we did management studies and that. So after I was with the department and budget for probably the first 4 or 5 years doing that, most of the time in the off season, I was working on special projects in the natural resource area. Was on some task force that Governor Call put together to review a lot of different areas, and we had a young cadre of folks that middle people in all the various natural resource agencies we put together, and I chaired that committee. We went around problem solving around the state on different things. Well, that led into working with the executive department, local government division, and Cass Cannon, the natural resource assistant for the governor, on starting to build programs for the land use issues in the state, trying to see how we could do that. So my first involvement was actually in staff work to try to get a land use bill through, I believe it was the 1969 legislature.
Is that Senate Bill 10?
And we got Senate Bill 10 through that.
You were involved in that.
Yeah. Pretty well behind the scenes, but I was involved in that. Yeah, and so that was really the first foray. Then by the 71 legislature, I was pretty much full-time. I did a little bit of budget work still, but I was pretty much full-time working as Cannon's assistant in natural resources. And then in the interim between 71 and 73 is when Project Foresight came about. And so I was representing the governor's office and the executive department on several aspects on that program. There was an overall steering committee, which you probably heard when you interviewed Justice Carson, when he was a senator then. He was on that committee. It was chaired by Clay Myers, who was Secretary of State then, and a bunch of notables on it. And they had a local government or a local government subcommittee to work with the task force, I guess. It wasn't a steering committee. It was like a technical committee. And I was on that committee along with other folks. And then there were set up various task forces that dealt with subject matter areas, and I chaired the natural resource task force. I worked on that project then. So a bunch of representatives from the agencies and local government, other places. And that project, developing those scenarios, was interesting in a year when we didn't have computers to do scenario planning like we do now. And but we worked with the firms. It was Hal Brauner Associates out of San Francisco that we contracted with to do that through the local government section of the executive department. So that was my first involvement.
Interesting.
First more public, more visible involvement, I guess I have to say.
So how did you come to become Governor Bacall's natural resources advisor?
Well,
a natural step for you?
Yeah, well, it was in the policy area where I could get more involved in the policy issues, and so being as I had the background in the natural resource agencies because of my budget work and doing management studies for a bunch of years in the off time, then I was really working as Cannon's assistant, and then when he left to become director of Department of Environmental Quality, and towards the end of McCall's term, then McCall appointed me as his natural resource advisor. That was fun.
All right. Was that fun?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was right in the thick of things then. Yeah.
So you staffed LBJ's drafting subcommittee for Senate Bill 100 during the 1973 session. What do you remember about that process and the players in it?
Oh boy, a long time ago. Yeah, I was worked with LB. I worked with LB prior to that. He chaired the subcommittee of Ways and Means when he was on the legislature that I was staff person for in natural resources. So LB and I had a pretty good relationship, and then working on McCall's staff, I was the natural one to work with him on that bill. And it was. We had a lot of pushing and pulling because it was made up of various stakeholder groups that had an interest in it, including the League of Oregon Cities and the Associated Oregon Counties, and I believe the Associated General Contractors, Home Build, those types of both private sector, business side, as well as environmental agencies, as well as local government. And obviously, I think that a lot of their ideas and thoughts were not in mesh. So it was a lot of trying to find out the compromises without giving away the farm, literally the land, the farming land. So it was. I don't know how many negotiation sessions we had, how many meetings we had. A lot of them, if I recall. And I was working on detail lining, and we had a staff person who worked in the local government division. Bob Logan was the director, and I was there. And the staff person probably has never been recognized as a back person on the land use bill. His name was Herb Riley, and he worked for LCDC later too. Here, when I was here, he actually came here when Arnold Colvin was here. He was the quiet, I would call the quiet brains behind the detailed language. And I would review with him. I was not an expert, but knowledgeable, but not the expert. And he would go to the draft and say, well, we get here without doing it, and giving away things, and here you got to really hold the line, and here, and he'd give us his advice, and he knew his stuff. And unfortunately, he's passed away long ago now, so I can't interview. I won't be able to interview him. But anyway, so working with him to make sure that the compromises worked. And there are some things we never came to compromise. LB says, well, this is what we're going to take.
LB Day said that?
Yeah.
What sort of leadership style did LB Day have, and how did he try to resolve these points of contention among people?
Well, LB had a leadership style that he knew where he wanted to go, and he worked to try to find the compromise. He's a very political animal, but when he said to go, he says, we're going to go. We're going to do this way. And he had, between being a legislature, a Republican side of things, and a Teamster official, he carried clout on all sides of issues. And so he had the behind-the-scenes political clout to say, we can go this far, but if you try to go further than that, some of that clout will come back on you folks. And he pushed the buttons.
So looking back, given the uniqueness of Oregon's land use planning program nationally then and still today, to what do you attribute the ability of Oregon's legislature then to pass such landmark legislation?
Well, we had a unique combination, I think, of people back then. Unlike today's legislature, which I get frustrated with all along, which is conservative, more Republican conservative on this camp and other Democrat in this camp, and never the twain meet, and they never cross the aisle. In those days, I think we had more people in the legislature on both sides of the aisle that were statesmen, that really cared about Oregon and worked on it. So you ended up with players in the whole game, like the Governor McCall was Republican, like then Treasurer Straub, who was governor later as a Democrat. You had Ted Halleck and Senator and McPherson, farmer in rural Portland area. You had Governor Atia, who came on later, but still was supportive in those days of Republican. So you had people from both sides that were more middle of the road and were willing to try to find the compromise points to look hard towards it. And he had the leadership of McCall. I mean, McCall was my mentor and hero, and he used the bully pulpit very well, and he was well spoken, and he got people together, and it wasn't easy. I mean, it was not a slam dunk. I mean, to get it through, it took good pressure on both houses and Senate, and it took a lot of pressure in the first several years when during my term as director, we survived at least one, maybe then two statewide elections to repeal the agency. So so it wasn't clear that it was going to happen, but it was a lot of people working hard, making the case that, as Governor Hall would have said, do we want to be Californicated? Do we want to become like the Bay Area, Los Angeles area?
It was a common cause.
Yeah.
So you became director of DLCD from 1975 to 1977. What was it like to be head of an agency that was just getting off the ground?
1975, yeah.
Brand new agency.
Brand new agencies. It was exciting. I mean, we were pretty much all of us pretty young folks. I was one of the oldest ones in the department. I was only 37 then, so as director, 36, I guess, when I first took over. And I didn't even realize. I mean, LCDC directorship would have been one of my places I would have liked to have been, because once the change of governors occurred, then I was out of a job. I'd worked my way up to governor appointee, and Governor Straub had his own person in natural resources, Janet McLennan, who he wanted in that job. And so Bob Davis, who was his assistant, called me into the office and he said, we're going to appoint somebody else to your jobs, but where do you want to go? And we want you on the team still. And he says, give me. I said, I'd want to play an active role wherever it's good. He said, well, give me the list of the agencies you want to be director of. I said, I don't know which ones are vacant. He says, we don't know that yet either. So just give me the list. And LCDC was on top of that list, but it was not appointed by the governor, so I thought maybe it wouldn't be there. But LB Day was chair of the commission then, and Arnold had just given his resignation and wanted to go back into private practice in Portland. And LB called me and says, come in with an interview for the commission. The commission, and I did. A day later, I was hired as director. So what was it like? Well, I took over. We were in a building down the street from where your office is now.
I know that building.
You were in there before you moved there too, and you were here times. Yeah. When we first moved in there were still underprivileged, I guess is the correct way to say it now. People living in the upstairs apartment. It was still converted. We hadn't done any remodeling to speak of, and we had the basement with terrible. Anyway, and the staff we had that I took over was administrative assistant, and Herb Riley and Roger Kirshner, who was a PR person, and 3 field reps, I think, was all we had at that time.
5 staff people?
Huh?
Is that right?
I think it was 5.
Five?
Oh, there was, yeah. And then we grew from that. Once we got they just adopted the first 10 goals. And so now we're trying to figure out, okay, now how are we going to implement those? How are we going to do the plan review? And we're trying to set up field reps to go out and work with the local cities and counties on getting it set up. And so I had the 2 that, I think it was only 2, might have been 3. The pretty sure it was Brent Lake, and but it was a long time ago. Anyway.
Kennedy?
He wasn't here yet. Anyway, they were our field reps, and we then moved the shortly after that was when the Oregon Coastal Zone Commission was dismantled and moved into the LCEC, and I inherited their staff from that. So Jim Ross came over. He was director of that. He came over as my deputy, and their staff most of them became field reps. Neil Conan and Becky and some others. And then we hired a couple of interns. One of them you still have working here part-time, and Bob Cartwright. Hired Bob and his twin brother as interns, and anyway, we started building the staff up to what was needed, but they were hard-working staff. We all were, and we were all young and enthusiastic and going at it. And some of the cities and counties were very resistant to us. Some of the cities and counties were willing to cooperate and go along, and others felt they all knew it better than we did because they'd been planning longer than we had. And so we had that mix of people, and so our field people had some interesting times in dealing with the various types of attitudes that the people had out there. And it wasn't long after we were already trying to do that is when we took on the Willamette Greenway whole issue. Because that was in the first year, if I recall, we adopted the Greenway goal in December of '75. And so we were already, the previous legislature, when they set up the planning process for the Greenway, put in it that it had to be approved by LCDC to make sure it was compatible. Well, they came in with a full state plan, and Governor Stroud wanted it to be exempted from the local plans. He said, this is a state plan, it shouldn't be under the local plans. And LB, Day, and myself, and the full commission, and subsequently said, no. One of the basic tenets of our land use one is that we go all through the local plans, and state interest gets put in through goals, not through state mandated plans that's outside of the local plan. So then we went out on the process to adopt the Greenway goal. From that, took the elements of the plan they'd come up with and adopted the goals, and that's how that one came about. And I think that, I think that Stroud didn't like that very well. He wanted it to be a supplement, so we were kind of, as an agency, on the governor's
the coastal goals adopted under your tenure?
Yes.
As
Yes.
well?
And so when we brought the coastal zone management staff in, we said, okay, and then the federal adopted the coastal zone management program, and each state do those. We said, well, again, this has to be done through the same type of process. We're not going to lay a coastal zone program on top of the local plans. It's going to be built into the local plans. And so we went through the process then of developing the coastal goals based on the very good work and a lot of research and stuff that the Coastal Commission had done prior to this inheritance. Documents you probably have here of the background studies from dunes and everything, because it fills a shelf like this with all the scientific studies. And so Jim Ross and I probably, I don't know how many times we flew back to Washington, D.C., but a couple times fly out in the morning and meet in a meeting in the afternoon, fly back red-eye in the night, and come back here for meetings the next day. And to convince the feds that our way of doing it through the goals could meet the program's approval. And they were skeptical. I think they were skeptical at first, but we finally won them over. And we adopted the coastal goals, and then through that, put a document together with those as the background, as the backbone of it. That is our coastal management program, and we were, I believe, the first coastal zone program to be approved, say, on the statewide one. And then during that same time, we got the first marine sanctuary under that program too, on the south side of Coos Bay. We got that approved during that time too. So that was fun. I mean, it was hard work. It was.
You were in the public eye.
But we accomplished a lot.
Was there a lot of media coverage of what the department was doing?
Yeah, we were in the
Positive,
press too
negative?
much. Yes, both. Depends on which press it was and what the topic was. We had to take, interesting out of the way when you adopt the goals, as you know, but maybe not everybody knows, that even though a Greenway goal was adopted or the coastal zone goals, you still had to hold hearings statewide under the law. It wasn't just in those areas.
Oh.
So in the Greenway one, we had to hold hearings. We held hearings on the coast, obviously, several places on the coast, and in the valley, obviously, because that's where we hit the first. I mean. But also a southern Oregon and eastern Oregon, and likewise the coastal zone ones. It's more on the coast, but still hold hearings in the valley and in the southern part. Some of those hearings were pretty contentious.
Believe it.
It's one of the few times in my public career that I've been shot at. We were going into I assume we were being shot at. We were going into a hearing in Roseburg at the fairgrounds. It's right off the freeway there. We were going down into the hearing, and we came out of our vans. We came out of the state police always went with us on these, covered our meetings, gave us protection, and they just grabbed us out and shoved us in the building and said, we got a threat call on it, and then the shots rang out from across the way.
Oh my
we
goodness.
didn't see any bullets hit or anything, but anyway, they said there was a sniper that they thought was out to get some of us.
And you continued.
And I continued, yeah.
So from the frying pan into the fire, then you went on to the first local government acknowledgement reviews.
Oh, yeah.
Which must also have been somewhat controversial.
Yeah.
So what are your recollections about that period?
Well,
I think Medford was one of them.
yeah, Medford. Some of I forget exactly which ones were first, but places like Lane County, who had a long history and the Corvallis area that had a long history of land use planning before LCDC even did it locally, felt they knew better, and they argued with us a lot. They said, ours is, what do you guys know? We've been doing it longer than you have. But they eventually, when we put conditions or subject to approval, you had these conditions to meet yet, and they grumblingly accepted it. Some of the, particularly the smaller cities, were really upset about having to do urban growth boundaries and that. But we tried to be pretty flexible when we dealt with the smaller cities and that. And they, said, just draw your line and give us some rationale, give us some reason. You don't have a lot, you don't have to worry about. Just make sure you're not on the main farmland around you if you can.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in that. And most of them, after they got really encouraged by the field reps, came
Mm-hmm.
through. A couple cities said no. One at least, if not more, disincorporated.
Oh.
Chantura over in eastern Oregon, outside of Burns. Vail, between Vail and Burns,
Mm-hmm.
a little restaurant, that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided they didn't want to do it. They just disincorporated, let the county be their plan.
Interesting.
So I had that type of approach there. Yeah, field reps they traveled a lot of time in their cars going around and
Mm-hmm.
deal with it. And so.
Well, 1,000 Friends of Oregon had just been created when you became director.
Yeah.
So what are your views regarding their efforts to interpret legislation and the goals?
They were very supportive in concept. They always felt we didn't go far enough on many of the things. Sometimes I felt that if I had the 1,000 Friends, the League of Oregon Cities, and the Associated Oregon Contractors all equally mad at me, that's probably not the right place. But no, they tried to push us to be more prescriptive, to be more state control, but they were very supportive of the efforts that we went through, and they became good allies later on too as we went through it. I think.
Do you think they were effective in shaping the direction of the program?
They had, I think 1,000 Friends actually came into play before LCDC was formed, before Senate Bill 100. Maybe, I don't know when they're doing it. At least some of the major players were around, because they had a lot of heavy influence, some of those people that were 1,000 Friends.
Right, the players were, but I believe it was actually started in January of 1975.
Yeah, could very well be. But some of the players are around then, some of the other.
Henry Richmond was active
had a
before
lot
then
of,
with Osberg.
Yeah, Osberg was the one that was hit,
he was involved.
Was heavy, and had a heavy influence on Governor McCall.
Mm.
It's then got him the backing that he wanted to do what he wanted to do, but it gave him the place that he could get ideas from and that too. So they helped shape it that way. I think they were very influential because we'd already adopted the first 10 goals. So Osprey was pretty influential on the farm goal and the timber goal, which was their two main ones, and citizen involvement goal. They were heavily pushing on those. And then later on, they were helpful in taking their membership in the local communities to push the local officials to go ahead and don't fight us, but join us in terms of getting the plans acknowledged and so forth.
Interesting.
Because they wanted the plans acknowledged, because that gave the hammer to be able to have things happen.
So were there other organizations at that time that were also effective in helping to shape this new program?
Well, I think there was a lot of players in it. I think to the benefit of the Associated General Contractors and the home builders and real estate people, they didn't like it, but they worked hard at finding a way to make it work for them. If they're going to have it, how can it work? And so it didn't become just an environmental thrust all by itself, which then could have really hurt some of the other areas. And so they had a hand in shaping the housing goal and some of the other things, make sure we have buildable lands and that type of thing out there. Yeah, so.
Was the
it
Farm
was
Bureau?
true. Huh?
Was the Farm Bureau active at the time?
Farm Bureau was too.
They
yes.
were.
Yeah, and Farm Bureau was interesting because they were very interesting. They had members who were very supportive and wanting to draw the line around but But they also had members that weren't very supportive because they were looking at their retirement or their family's legacy of redeveloping their farmland just outside the cities. And that became one of the biggest issues during the Senate Bill 100 discussion in the 73 session was, okay, you're taking away some of my rights, my compensate. How are you going to compensate me for my loss of value? And we punted on that in Senate Bill 100 because most of us that were trying to develop it felt there was no truly loss of it was loss of potential, not actual. But we couldn't convince them, so we put a placeholder in Senate Bill 100 that said we will study in the interim the compensatory zoning and compensation for loss of property rights if there is any. And then there was a Senate committee, or I think it was a joint committee, set up during the 73-5 interim, gave their report at the end of 74, if I recall, because it went to the 75 legislature, which basically came back and said there is no loss of rights. And you don't need there's no way you can compensate, and really it's loss of speculative rights, not and some of the zoning can give value to things, but you don't need to, that's just the luck of the draw. And so that was pretty controversial in the 75 session, because they said, well, you didn't do your job, you're supposed to come up with something, but that's what happened, and it's stayed that way since then.
Interesting. Well, what do you believe have been the major accomplishments of the statewide land use program over the years?
What's the major accomplishment? We preserved a heck of a lot of farmland. We still have our beaches and coastal zone stuff. We're protecting the natural resources, but we haven't stopped growth, and we're still growing.
What have been what have been the major setbacks and challenges?
I think the toughest thing that I've seen evolve, when the bill was first set up, if there was a dispute of whether a goal, whether a plan was being met, or whether a development met the plan, or that, the appeal process was to the commission. Right. And that became a heavy workload for the commission. In addition to doing all the acknowledgements, then you had that. So we went to a hearings officer approach that did the basic hearings officer, and then the commission ratified it or not on its own appeal. John Clough was the C-L-O-U-G-H. Clough was the first hearings officer for that. It's lasted for a couple of years, and that worked pretty well. Then after I was gone later on, then people felt that no, that was too in-house, and that's when the LUBA board, the land use, was set up, and then the process to appeal. Previously, the commission decision, the hearing officer decision, could be appealed to the Court of Appeals directly. Now, LUBA replaced the commission and the hearings officer as a place to go, and it's become, I think, a lot more litigious. I mean, and it's delayed a lot of things, and it's been costly for both developer side and for people trying to protect it.
Having LUBA function as that
and
appeal
just
agency?
all the heavy appeal process. The easy way to appeal, it doesn't take much to appeal it. Doesn't take a lot of dollars for somebody that wants to stop something, or somebody that doesn't like having been stopped. So I've seen that as being a city councilor now in Corvallis. We did a major update on the comprehensive plan right after I took office. We did that in 2001. 2002 was when we developed the update. It was appealed to LUBA, and so because it was appealed, the comprehensive plan amendment was not appealed, but the land code development was appealed underneath it, and it took until 2006. It took 5 years to get that resolved. So we had that 5 years where we had a new comprehensive plan, the old development codes that didn't necessarily support that, and then trying to work all our decisions in between that, and then some of those decisions will be appealed.
So it took 5 years to go through LUBA?
LUBA, yeah.
Did they have a backlog, or?
No, it was part of the backlog, and well, it went to the Court of Appeals too, so it went through LUBA and then the Court of Appeals. It got remanded, part of it, we went through the remand, sent it back up, it got appealed again, just until it came into effect. It caused, and so during that interim, we had to make decisions on, we had to make amendments to the land use code that weren't comprehensive, so we weren't in conflict on particular projects when they came forward, so they weren't in conflict with our comprehensive plan, but you had to go through a exception process through those, and some of those got appealed too, and anyway, it was just, and so when it came finally, when you got the new code upheld, we had so many amendments to it, we had to redo all the code, and redo it again to bring it in compliance. So anyway, that's an extreme example, but it's just, I think it's just, it's taken it away from local government being able to do as they see right, as long as they're meeting the goals, but it does carry out the citizen involvement piece of it, because citizens can appeal very easily now. So it's a mixed blessing, but it has become much more a full employment act for lawyers than what I would have liked, what we envisioned back then.
Okay.
But it's still working.
Yeah. So do you think there are any important land use topics or policies that LCDC overlooked in adopting the goals? Or any goals that have been underutilized? Well,
I don't think any has been underutilized as such. You've had some significant changes on definition of farmlands since the original ones, which has improved the farmland one, because basically, whether it was class 1, 2, or 3 or 4 farmland, it was all treated the same, and now
high value farmland.
High value farmland gets protected better, and that's been a good move. It was a weakness in the first one. We tried to protect too much, I think. But it was better to go that way and come back than to try to go the other way, I think. I think you go through the goals, there's the topics are covered pretty comprehensively. I think there's some issues that could have been if there was local communities wish to use it more, or local citizens, that could have been enhanced, like the Willamette Greenway goal, enhance the protection of the Willamette area. There's been an ongoing movement forever in the Rogue Valley, in the Bear Creek Valley, down in Medford and Ashland area, about protecting Bear Creek Greenway, and I think they could have accomplished that better if they had gone through a goal process on that too, instead of trying to do it all through but it was not a state agency one, it was more of a local one, so it fit where it was. But was there something needed like the coastal one for mountain areas? Thought about that at times, but so much of that's already in federal preserves and state preserves and state ownership that it's not so much needed there.
There was at one time a proposal for a carrying capacity goal.
Carrying capacity, yeah, that's always that's a tough one to deal with. Yeah, that would have been hard to define.
So farm and forest land protection has always been a core element of the program.
Absolutely.
But also planning for development.
Absolutely. You don't want to stop development.
How successful do you think the state has been in balancing these sometimes conflicting goals?
Well, I think the fact that you have the urban growth boundaries in the process to establish in the first place, and then that you've got plenty of room. You have to have room within the urban growth boundaries to do your development, but yet it's not just willy-nilly spread out all over the place. It's concentrated, which then protects the farmland. And so, if we hadn't had the concept of the urban growth boundary, then I think it would have been very difficult to do it. But having that concept, I think it gave the appropriate balance between the development and and protecting the lands. I mean, certainly the Portland area hasn't been stymied on development because of the goals they don't have, or other Medford have either. There's been some communities that have tried to get an urban growth boundary expansion that's been more difficult to get through, but when they make the case, they can expand it. And I think it's done a remarkable job of making that balance between the two.
Well, do you think legislative and court actions and LCDC actions have maintained an appropriate balance between state and local interests and roles?
Pretty much, yeah. I think some of the court actions and some of the legislature keeps trying to aid to pull power is the right word, to the state away from local governments, which erodes somewhat that concept, but pretty well been with constrained. It hasn't. The whole issue with state and local is probably funding more than anything else, but that's a whole other topic.
Well, the Oregon legislature has continually readjusted the program over the years, almost every legislative session, in response to changing circumstances and public input. Have you been tracking or have been involved with any of this land use legislation, and are there any laws that you opposed or supported in particular? I really haven't been once I got out, other than working on the city council. After I left LCDC with worn out, one way to put it, I became county administrative officer for Marion County for a couple of years, and then left that job when we had major budget problems, and I cut my own job out of the budget. Left there, and that's a whole other story there. And then I went to work for Corvallis School District, and as Director of Business Services, head of all the non-instructional side. So I was pretty involved in all that. So I wasn't dealing with land use issues too much then. My interest was still there, generally following development, but I didn't follow the legislation that close, other than looking to see if there was any big red flags come up. That, and then I got back involved when I got elected to city council to deal with it. But no, I think it's still working. I think they tweak it. It's got to tweak. And whether I would 100% do it exactly, but I think we've learned, and there's none that I have come up with that says, gee, they've destroyed the system. The system's still working. So as a city councilor, in what ways do you think the state land use planning program has influenced the way cities plan for the future, for better or for worse? It's been for better, and it's some communities would have probably done most of the things we're doing. We came under anyway, whether we'd have had Senate bill under. I think cities like Corvallis would have, cities like Lake Oswego, maybe some of the others. I'm not so sure about Eugene, Springfield, Salem probably. I don't know. Anyway, depending on the makeup of those communities, we're concerned about these issues before we even had to, and continue to be concerned about encroachment on farmland and so forth. But majority wouldn't have. So having the goals completely shaped that all cities had to do, and all counties had to work with it, and all are on the same page and working. And the requirement to do planning, which came out even in Senate Bill 10 of '69, didn't really have teeth until we had the LCDC and the goals, because then you could enforce that requirement more. And so under the Senate Bill 10 scenarios, it was more of those that wanted to do it did a pretty good job, and those that didn't want to do it didn't do it, and that caused them some of the impetus to get Senate Bill 100, and now it's caused everybody to have to do it, just kicking and screaming or willingly. So I think it's been a very positive effect on it. It consumes a lot of city councilors' time, and particularly for a community like Corvallis, which still wants development, but has the university there, a very liberally oriented community, but some old timers that don't like change,
and a very engaged and active community. So every development that comes forward has people that support it and don't. And if they haven't followed exactly the rules, if there's any variances needed, that was my phone. If there's any variance to the code, it's going to be heavily involved with the planning commission. It will be appealed to the council.
Mm-hmm.
It may very well be appealed to LUBA. So
there's our citizen involvement.
because there's a lot of citizen involvement. We have a lot of it in Corvallis. Not all the communities have it the same way, but it's. I'm wandering here now a little bit.
Oh, that's good. Do you think DLCD or others need to do more to create greater equity or fairness in the system, as some would ask for?
I don't know how do you get fair? My question would be, how do you get fairness in whose eyes? Is probably what it is. It's
probably private property rights.
Yeah. Well, I think there is no. Yeah. The whole concept of having land use planning goes against the very conservative view of property rights. I mean, you can do anything you want to do with your land. I mean, that's not to the common good to do that. So once you get past that, then the issue becomes, the broader community has the right through public process to set constraints on it. They don't have the right to take your property, but they have the right to set constraints. And then the argument comes over, in my mind, the taking of potential profit or potential value. And to me, that's a non-starter, because that's only potential. I mean, you're not guaranteed if you put money in the stock market, you're going to get money in the stock market. You shouldn't be guaranteed just because you put own money in own land that you're going to gain a profit. Your existing uses can't be taken away from you. That's power. If that needs to be done for a public purpose, then you have the power of eminent domain, and there's court case give you fair market value. But just because you hope someday to get inside an urban growth boundary and be able to subdivision in instead of my farmland or my forestry, and now I don't have that right to do that, that never was a right in my mind. But there's a lot of people disagree with that view. But the courts have upheld that view over many cases over history, long before even Senate Bill 100 came into place. And there's been a lot of court cases since.
And I'll just add the lot of record provisions in Senate Bill 37 and 49 were efforts to respond to that concern that some people have.
Yeah, and I think we've whittled away at some of those edges a little bit that takes some of the powers. It gives more power, that takes away some of the power of government to keep our environment good. But it's all part of the balancing, and it's all part of the will of the people on some of that stuff too.
So looking back again, do you think Oregon's land use planning program has achieved what was originally envisioned in 1973?
Yes. 100%? No, because I don't think you have people. None of us could see that well, that far ahead, you know. But no, one of in the Foresights project, there was two scenarios. What if we had land use planning, and what if I recall, and it's been a long time ago, and there was if we have no land use planning and what we have now, and one scenario painted, you know, basically urbanization up and down from Eugene to Portland, and lose all that prime farmland, and that with the planning that you clustered your development, you preserve the farmland, and that scenario two is what's happened all by and large. The scenario, I forget which number was which, but anyway, the one that had the land use planning. We do not have urbanization up and down. We have very, very viable farmland up and down the valley. You know, I think it has accomplished and has been a model for other places to look at. Not very few people have done it all the way we have. But
well, looking ahead to the next 40 years, we can look back 40 years, we can look ahead 40 years. What do you think we should be doing to address major challenges and issues that we face, such as population growth, the economy, climate change, the environment, affordable housing, and so on?
Those are good questions. I can't say that I have the crystal ball that gets to all of those. I think we've got to, as a state and as communities in the state, I think we need to keep it at the forefront that that we are just stewards of the land, not possessing the land. And as long as we keep that mentality, which I think overall we have, not everybody, but as a state I think we have, as long as we keep that, we will find ways to do our part in the broader issues, climate control, climate change issues, goes obviously well beyond local communities and well beyond the state and well beyond even the nation. It's a worldwide issue, but each of us has to do our part. I'm terrible on quoting people, but there's a quote that goes, what we can do locally is just a drop in the ocean, but the ocean's made up of many, many drops. And so our city council right now in Corvallis, for example, we have four major goals this year that we have for this council term that we've adopted, and two of those three of them directly relate to that issue. One is we're redeveloping our vision for the community for the next 20 years. Our last one was adopted about 20 years ago. 15 years ago, it's up in 2020 vision. Now we're going to redo that, but we're going to go better to do benchmarks against it. We have a local goal on doing locally a climate action plan.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do it. And we have a housing goal. We had a study there to try to get more affordable housing in our community, which is a tougher one, I think. Not they're all tough ones, in our community. And then we have a sustainable budget one, is how you're going to pay for all that stuff. And that's probably the hardest one. But
you're the budget guy.
Well, I'm chairing the task force that's doing the budget one. So, so there's not a lot of options in the state right now to do that. And that's a challenge. You can have all the good ideas, but sometimes it costs public funds to do those things. And how do you do it? I mean, your agency, LCDC, has seen the brunt of that over the years of not having the funding adequately to do some of the things, and every state agency has. And we're seeing it. But anyway, we'll do our part. We'll figure out how to do it. But I think if we don't, I could do it a vision that way. I'd like to see the future in 40 years, but I don't think I'd like to see us all finding a way to get around without using gas-sucking vehicles. I'd like to see us clustered in communities that have jobs and shopping and the housing all together. That's the vision we had back then. We still have a vision I'd like to see us do better at than what we're doing. Even though urban growth boundaries are still very few communities have within those boundaries, where you can live all. Even in our community, we have 27,000 jobs in Corvallis, and we have 18,000 of those. 18,000 of those drive into town every day or get into town every day. 9,000. We live in Corvallis and work in Corvallis, and another 9,000 people that live in Corvallis and work someplace else. And we're not unusual. It's a very mobile society, so that creates, and probably 98% or more of those people coming in and going out are in single occupancy cars. And that's got to change. We don't have the funding to build the infrastructure to accommodate that kind of cars, but even if we could, we shouldn't, in my mind. And we've got to change people's attitudes on it. Either they got to live where they work, or they got to start using more energy efficient ways of getting back and forth, whether it's mass transit or whether it's even carpooling would help.
That sounds like a vision of the future.
And that's where it is kind of a vision of the future on that part of it. And I hope our future, we still have very productive farmland. We still have timber resources that's important. We still have our our rivers and streams clean. We still have beaches that are accessible. And that was another part of my checkered career, was working on Governor McCall's beach bills. We did that before. That's got me started really on all that. That and the bottle bill. I got the opportunity to draft the bottle bill for Representative Hanneman.
Oh, you did?
And so I was on McCall staff, and we passed the beach bill to public access to beaches, and I'm losing track of sessions, but probably 67 session, I guess, the first one. I don't remember for sure. But anyway, the bill basically said everything west of the vegetation line was public access. And we went to court. We lost the court cases being undefined. So my interim job that way was to work with the highway department surveyors, and we surveyed they surveyed. I'm not a surveyor, but I was charged, McCall's representative of the highway department to get that done. And we surveyed the meets and bounds all the way from Astoria to the California border. That's in the statute now, and everything west of that is beach.
Justice Carson mentioned the same thing.
Yeah.
About measuring the
meets and bounds all the way
meets and
through.
bounds,
Yeah.
right.
That was
Right,
you know, the first attempt was declared as unenforceable because it could be because what is the vegetation line could change from winter to summer and so forth and so forth. And so rather than giving up, McCall says, well, then if they need a specific line, go get a specific line. Told the highway department, spend some staff time to do it. Just like before we got the bottle bill, we tried it the year before and session before, and it didn't pass. And he says, figure out a way that we can find out how many bottles are in the bill. So this special project I had again, went to the highway department, and we set up the road crews, and we started gathering litter up and down for a year, bringing it back to the, and dumping it in and counting how much of it was bottles and how much of it was not. And just took that evidence with the legislature when it said, and the highway department was moaning because they were, we want to use our staff to do that, but McCall says, we got to have that information. And we took that information with Representative Hanneman and got the bill. So that was the kind of leadership that we had back then that I don't see happening now. It's different times too.
Are there ways in which public outreach efforts could better communicate to Oregonians the value of the program and why it's important?
Well, I think projects like this gets the information put together, so you have information to talk about it. I think the more, I think there was a good, the recent PBS series, which I didn't get a chance to see it all yet. I want to get it on Governor McCall. Gets information out to a lot. I've had more people say, you used to work with, boy, it was amazing what happened there. Let's understand now better why, that type of thing. And I think that's probably more effective than a true PR campaign. I mean, just going out with a government agency trying to get information out. If we can get just more of the history known in a way that people will watch.
Well, over half of the people living in Oregon today weren't here when the program was adopted, and they may not have heard much of anything about it unless they happened to catch a controversial piece in the newspaper.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah. So.
Well, before we wrap up, are there any other reflections or thoughts you have, or anything I've forgotten to ask you?
I can't think of anything. You're very good on the questions. It was interesting to think back through all that time, and I do have some. Your questions you sent to me on the email triggered them. My memory isn't so good that I could have remembered everything I said here just off the cuff. So I went back and I had actually forgotten that I was on the foresight committees. I mean, I knew I was involved in it, but actually named on the committees. I hadn't have a copy of how much study I had that I inherited. And so I went back looking. Oh, wow, I was there. I remember I was really actually on the committee. Sometimes when you're this far away from it, how much of this did I make up, and how much did I've embellished over time, and how much of it was real? So I said, once you're going to interview me here, I just got to be real. I wasn't going to. So I went and did was I really? I don't know. When Senate Bill 10 was enacted, whether it was in 69 or 71, and so
69.
And so I went out on with the new tools, and they don't have the chapter laws back that far online. So I couldn't look there, and of course it isn't codified in the other laws because it's been changed since then. So I didn't know until I walked in your building here, and you have that little timeline of major things in land use, and it says 69, something like that. That's what I was. So, but anyway, no, there's nothing more that I want to cover, except I feel that it was an honor and a privilege for me to be at the right place at the right time during that time, to be involved in the things I was involved in. To be start working for the state government at 63 as a 24-year-old, and working through all that on up till I finally was booted out of state government in 77, and then being involved in Oregon and other aspects of public life on through. That was a highlight of my career, but it wasn't one that, I've done a lot of things since then that I'm proud of too, so it wasn't one I just sat back and say, well, I've done it, and I don't have to do it anymore, or gee, I wished I was still back there. In fact, there's a lot of ways I don't wish I was back there. It was hectic times, all the pressure.
Well, it's been a delight to talk with you here today. Thank you so much, Hal Brauner, for taking the time to sit down with me and chat.
Thanks for remembering me.